This is the Bureau of Lost Culture. Marjane Satrapi, Alan Moore, Neil Gaiman, Gilbert Shelton, Robert Crumb, Kelly Sue DeConnick, Marjorie Lou Hunt, Emerson. Some names there known to most of us, I suspect, others not perhaps, but all figures, artists or writers familiar to lovers of comics, cartoons and graphic novels. Along with the free press publications like International Times, Friends, Oz, Spare Rib, with whom they often interacted, comics, graphic art and illustration have always played an important part in the counterculture. As probably few people more than Tony Bennett, our guest today, know. Now, it's not a subject that I'm particularly familiar with, and whilst that has never really stopped me talking at length about something before, in this episode of the Bureau of Lost Culture, I, Stephen Coates, am joined by someone much better placed than me to guide us as we flick through the pages of comics and countercultural history. So, Knockabout Comics, a UK-based publisher of the finest underground and alternative comics and graphic novels, founded in its first incarnation by Tony Bennett as a means to distribute Gilbert Shelton's hippy-slacker masterwork, the Fabulous Furry Freak Brothers. Knockabout has published noted British talents such as Alan Moore, Hunt Emerson, Eddie Campbell, Brian Bolland, Neil Gaiman, Dave McKean, Martin Rowson and many more, along with US creators such as Robert Crumb, Melinda, Gebbie, and celebrated creators from Europe. So I'm very pleased to have Tony Bennett here with us. Hello, Tony.
Hi.
And to help guide us through, turntablist, musician, designer and collector of all things countercultural, particularly vinyl and comics, DJ Food, Kev Foakes. Hello, Kev.
Hi there, Stephen.
Welcome, Kev. Welcome, Tony. So, Tony, we're going to dig in deep into the subjects of comics and counterculture. Dig deep into Knockabout and your life publishing comics. But it didn't start there, did it? Your life in the counterculture started in Brighton, didn't it? Well, actually, give us a quick whip through that.
I guess that's when it started. I moved to Brighton in '66, and was working with various alternative things going on down there. There's a thing called the South Sea Bubble, was like an arts labby thing.
Right. Because arts labs were a big thing, weren't they, in the UK in the 60s?
Yeah, in Birmingham
and
London
70s, actually,
and Northampton, yeah. And then a bookshop opened, one of the first sort of radical bookshop outside London, Unicorn Books, run by a guy called Bill Butler, who was a poet and writer. And I worked there for a bit of time, designing some book covers, doing a bit of bookkeeping, and then gradually got more and more involved with them. And we were publishing books about poetry books, books of alternative technology, books about marijuana. So various, and the shop was selling all sorts of imported and countercultural stuff.
So a head shop, basically.
No, pre-head shops. It wasn't. No, it was only books. It was a bookshop.
So no bongs and blacklight posters and all that.
No, this is pre-bongs really. The bongs only just coming, I think. So, yeah.
Can I ask you something, Tony? Which is that I'm always intrigued by, which is that it's 66 or 68? Was it
66.
66, right? So I'm always interested to know, with people who were there at the time, did you feel like there was something going on? We talk about the counterculture in the 60s and stuff, and whatever you want to call it, Age of Aquarius, or sort of on the brink of a new society. Did it feel like that to you, or were you just a young guy doing your thing?
Well, we were surrounded. Brighton was like a mini San Francisco in some ways, without exaggerating its importance, but it had that kind of feel to it. So there were lots of drugs, lots of alternative stuff going on, lots of things like food co-ops and alternative free schools and stuff like that.
Lots of squats?
Lots of squats, yeah. But also lots of cheap housing at that time in the 60s. I think squatting didn't really get started properly until the 70s when there was more of a squeeze on housing.
Okay.
So not so much squatting.
But it sounds like it was, particularly in Brighton, and if you describe it as a sort of British San Francisco, it does feel like you were sort of in the heart of the counterculture then, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was just because it was by the seaside. That's probably one of the connections. There was Indica Bookshop in London, and then the Arts Lab in London. There are other things going on in London as well. Yeah. But yeah, Brighton had a large population of people, proportionate population of people doing silly things.
And then you took this large leap right the way across country, in fact into a different country, because you moved to West Wales. So
yeah, we'd had problems at Unicorn with the obscenity busts and things like that. J.G. Ballard's book we published called Why I Want to Fuck Ronald Reagan. They didn't like that, and they seized various other things and lost the cases at Unicorn. We did manage to get a little plaque made from similar to the College of Heralds, which said pornographers by appointment to H.M. the Queen. And then...
By the way, we're going to come back to this because this is a theme actually which runs through your whole career, isn't it? About running into problems with the law for obscene publications.
And then in the early 70s, mainly driven by Bill Butler, we decided we were going to move to Wales. So we rented a farmhouse and farmyard and a few acres and moved out. They had a printing press in the barn.
Was that an economic thing or something? Or it's quite a long leap from Brighton.
It was partly sort of a community-based feeling, you know, want to go and try and do this thing, get away, move to the country was a big thing.
Okay.
They did it in the Freak Brothers as well later on. Gilbert Shelton wrote about it.
Yeah.
And so we moved there and we had cows and pigs and chickens and grew our own food and had a still so we could make really, really strong liquor and then sit round in the evening trying to bind books that we'd printed and getting it wrong.
Who is we?
We. So I think there were 7 of us. There was Bill and his partner Mike. There was me and my partner Bernadette. A guy called Malcolm Smith, who'd been at Unicorn in Brighton. And then 2 friends of mine came in, Chris and Mary, to do... They were more farmers. They'd also fled to the country from London. And so they were organising the farming side of things.
So it's a proper community then?
Yeah. So we lived on not very much money.
Yeah.
And
but making a living selling the books?
Yeah. Scraping by.
Yeah.
Until it all faded away in 1975, I think, when we got into huge debt with the people who'd been distributing our books, didn't pay us.
And then you did publish 100 titles, right?
Yeah, something like that. But some of them were in Brighton before we went to Wales. Yeah.
And you're distributing International Times, Oz and Friends.
Yeah, all of those. Yeah.
So you're very much involved with that.
You had a link to them in London.
Yeah, well, first we were distributing in the southeast with some people called Frit Freight from Guildford, and so we were doing all the southeast distribution. We were doing festivals with Oz and IT. So in the late 60s through to...
And when you say distribution, you were driving physically to the shops?
Not at that time. We were mainly mailing things out.
Okay.
Then when, from 75 on, when it became clear that the Welsh experiment wasn't going to carry on, Bill and I drove all over the country to everybody who'd ever bought anything from us, and visited every shop. And then we'd find out, this shop had only bought one thing.
Right.
And then I worked out a route. So I would drive all over the country from Plymouth to Stirling and Bangor to Canterbury and whatever, every 6 weeks with a van full of interesting stuff, and convince shops at that time. Lots of radical bookshops at the time still existed.
Yeah.
And independent record stores.
Yeah.
So they were a big...
And you had head shops by that point, or
head shops were just starting.
Okay.
Yeah,
And you did stalls at festivals as well.
Yeah.
Was that in the 60s or in the 70s?
The first festivals, I guess, were in the late 60s. Would be like the
pre-Glastonbury though.
Pre-Glastonbury, yeah, a couple of years before Glastonbury, with all sorts of American bands and other English psychedelic bands.
You're also publishing books on self-sufficiency, cannabis.
Yeah,
as well as the poetry books, right? So all countercultural stuff, right? And of course, before we forget, because you brought a copy with you, your own comic Trip Strip.
Yes,
yeah.
You just presented Kev with a copy of. It's amazing.
Which is screen printed, you said?
Yes, it's screen printed. Yeah.
At that time, obviously, all that stuff, Tony. It's publishing books on cannabis and all that stuff. It's all quite fringe, isn't it? I suppose. So were you always getting in the tap on the door and the authorities coming around to have a peek at what
on
you're
and
doing?
Off. I mean, it was interesting as time went through the 70s. We would import lots of stuff from America, drug books, comics, underground comics. Customs didn't really like anything with sex in them, and would seize those, and we'd go to court over that. But they passed all sorts of drug books through. They didn't seem to worry about that. Later on, the obscene publications branch of the Metropolitan Police seized all the drug books because they wanted to use those as a test case. Different strokes of different authorities.
Did they then pass the sex books and just concentrate on the drug books?
Yes. Yeah.
But we're getting a bit ahead here, aren't we?
We are.
Because after when you were in Wales, you started Hassle-Free Press.
Yes, because we'd been importing undergrounds, Zap Comics, Freak Brothers, and at Unicorn in Brighton, and distributing those as well, and other underground comics. Then when it became clear that, and some of the Freak Brothers comics got seized by customs because somebody had complained about something, and so I decided to get the rights to the Freak Brothers and started publishing the Freak Brothers here.
Well, no, I'm a newbie in this world of comics, but even I know about the Fabulous Furry Freak Brothers. But for anybody who doesn't, because it is a very important comic, isn't it? So just give us...
It's the world's best-selling underground comic by far.
And what is it? What's it about?
It's 3 slacker hippies who smoke a lot of dope, take a lot of other drugs, and satirise the world. Gilbert Shelton's essence is that he's a master satirist of politics, society, and people who are, let's say, drug takers, or people who aren't, still enjoy them because they're funny.
Yeah, it very much starts out on the sort of classic stereotypical Haight-Ashbury hippie kind of trip, doesn't it? But then he takes it literally all over the world. Yeah. There's the classic Idiots Abroad story.
Yeah, that's in here, which I'll leave with you. This.
Which is just unbelievable. And so how did you meet Gilbert Shelton? Did you have,
I didn't meet him in 75 or whenever I started doing that. I met him a couple of years later.
Yeah, I have a story that literally somebody told me only on Sunday. A friend of mine, a record collector, he said he was hitchhiking around the UK in the 70s, and he got picked up by an old hippie in a car, and they got chatting as you do. I don't know where they were going anyway. He said, what do you do? And he said, I draw comics. And he said, oh, what kind of thing? And he said, have you ever heard of the Fabulous Furry Freak Brothers? And it was Gilbert Shelton driving his books around, and he had boxes full of the books in the back of the car, and he was driving them around the UK to either go to bookshops to drop them off, or to do a talk or sign.
I think it was was this in Scotland? Because he did spend some time with his wife driving around Scotland. He got invited up there to do something.
This is in 77, so maybe. I don't know. But yeah.
And Gilbert lived in London for a year.
Okay.
As well, when they were thinking of leaving America, because America wasn't good for underground cartoonists in some ways.
Yeah.
The same reason Robert Crumb moved from America. So Gilbert tested out the ground in London and Barcelona before eventually settling in Paris.
Okay. Right. So you took on got the rights for Freak Brothers and started to distribute them. So that's been your best-selling title, has it, down the years?
I would think so. Yeah, steadily. Yeah. We don't do the thin floppy comics anymore because the market for those disappeared in many ways with the sort of demise of the head shops and the independent record stores.
But you said as well, to get people over. I mean, in the UK, there's a prejudice against comics in that there's a perception that comics are for children. On the continent and elsewhere, that isn't the case. Comics are for everybody, and there's no children's comics, adult comics sort of thing. There's not as much of a divide. There's a much freer attitude to sex and drugs. And you said that you got spinner racks put into the bookshops to display your stuff that set them apart from everything.
Yeah, exactly. Else. So they didn't get shelved with the Beano or 2000 AD or whatever it might be. They were completely separate. Yeah. So we got those into Virgin Records and some Waterstones, and Waterstones or Dylan's which was there before Waterstones.
Yeah, because your attitude to comics is quite interesting from what you were saying earlier, in that you've got your comics market, but you don't necessarily think that what you do is necessarily comics. It's alternative culture.
Yeah, I would think so. Yes, it doesn't. I mean, only something like 10% of what we publish gets sold through the specialist comic book trade. The rest gets sold through general book trade or through the internet, nowadays through the internet as well. Yeah.
You also said, Tony, that you actually had an active interest in bringing countercultural ideas to a wider audience. So, and of course, you love comics and you love graphic novels and stuff like that, but you've chosen to go down this route of underground comics, and some of them quite provocative and stuff. So tell us about that. What is it that's motivated you down the years to choose that particular route for publishing?
I like the medium of comics. I got to like the medium of comics through the undergrounds, really. I had read the Beano and Topper and things when I was a kid, but I'd never been a great comic collector of Fantastic Four or Spider-Man or anything like that. And then when the undergrounds came along, I'd always liked how a comic works, and it was the content, the storytelling, what you could write about in comics that was interesting.
More real life, really.
More real life and exploring boundaries and pushing at things. And
well, it would be great for both of you actually to talk about that. I mean, this subject. I know it's a massive subject, but I mean, the role that comics play in the counterculture. What opportunity do comics have, I suppose, to be counterculture, which other ways of publishing haven't got?
Well, you've got no budgets in the same way as you got with films, have you? With comics, you can have a crazy sci-fi thing as much as the imagination allows. But I think what underground and alternative comics were doing was they were showing real life, whereas your regular comics like Marvel and DC and your Beanos and stuff, that's very much in a sort of fantasy world. And that's what I like about the alternative culture as well, is that you get the sex and you get the drugs and you get all that comes with that. Literally, that slice of life is, showcased and parodied as well.
Yes, and you get political commentary and things that you don't get so much in other things. And if people could read it, they're very assimilable as well. Well, I think so. Some people, I do offer things to people and they go, I don't know how to read a comic. And you just need to learn how to do it, and then you can do it. But they appear.
How do you do it?
It's a zigzag, isn't it?
It's
left
a zigzag,
to right,
yeah.
left to right, left to right.
It seems obvious to me, but
yes.
if you haven't grown up with it, it's quite difficult.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, my son reads manga. One of my sons reads manga excessively, and he's just started to read British comics, some of my collection, and he says it's very different. He says people die really quickly within a couple of panels, don't they? Whereas in Japan, you've got multiple panels where the action happens and it's slowed down almost. Yeah.
So the other thing I suppose really is that in terms of this countercultural service that you're offering, because publishing stuff which is about drugs, which could be information based, right? So guide to.
A lot of it was, yeah.
Right. So you're actually providing a service, right, as well?
We were doing both. So so we'd be producing books about how to recognise psilocybin mushrooms, psychotherapy and LSD, how to grow your own marijuana instead of buying it from the mafia. I exaggerate. You're probably still doing that. And at the same time as doing things like the Freak Brothers, which were taking piss out of that same culture.
Right. So there is that kind of you're bringing a kind of social benefit, right? So you're informing people, and we all know. Well, maybe we don't all know, but we generally agree that information's better than prosecution.
Yeah, definitely.
Right? Okay. And at the same time, there's a kind of like entertainment thing to it as well. You said here also that comics may be ephemeral and low art, right?
Somebody else's description, not mine.
Right. But, of course, you also say that, graphic novels have been given Pulitzer Prizes and Guardian Book Awards. So it is maybe... Is it the UK that's a bit sort of funny about comics, Kev? I mean, is it?
Oh, I think it is definitely, yeah. There's definitely still a perception from a large proportion of the public. It has changed over time. You can't ignore writers like Alan Moore anymore. You haven't been able to ignore him for probably 3 decades now since Watchmen. And... he's in The Guardian just the other day because he's just done a book deal with Bloomsbury or whoever, for sort of a 4-volume fantasy series. He's up there on par with, any other well-known writer, J.K. Rowling or something.
And do you think it's partly the efforts of people like Tony that's made that happen, that shift into kind of,
I would have
more serious acceptance?
Definitely in the UK, I would say Knockabout for the alternative, and maybe Paul Gravett, who is heavily involved with the Cartoon Museum, and there was a very good exhibition of comics just about 4 years ago. Was it the British Library, something like that? Yeah, and IPC with 2000 AD. What was IPC? It's now Rebellion. They've pushed forward in the sphere of UK comics, and a lot of people who came out of the 60s and 70s, writers like Pat Mills, who started off with 2000 AD, and they've come from the 60s, and actually they were more from the punk era, weren't they? Really?
Yes, I think that's true.
They were sort of the new angry young men, and I think Alan probably straddles that sphere as well, doesn't he? Obviously he's a little more hippie than punk, but he comes from that counterculture, absolutely.
But Tony, we've already sort of touched on it. You've had quite a few run-ins with the law, and the quite interesting thing for me in all that stuff is that there's a sort of strange censorship story which hasn't been told, isn't there? Because a lot of your kind of run-ins with the law seem to be on the basis of sex or drugs, right? But when it comes down to it, you've successfully fought some cases and not so successfully fought others. But we consider ourselves, don't we, in this country to be not a place where we have sort of censorship. It's not like the Soviet Union was or something like that. But in fact, as it turns out, that is not the case, right?
It's partly because it's comics, to an extent. That thing of them being...
For children.
For children, low art again. The same in America and here. America's freedom laws and parody laws are slightly better than ours. So they haven't been... comics have got busted in the States. Yeah, so customs didn't like lots of things. So I went to court quite a lot of times. So what happens with customs? Some boxes of books come in, they don't like them, they seize them, and then you have to take them to court within 30 days. Otherwise they just destroy them. So most people just ignore it. So pornographers generally ignore them and just get some more in and hope it gets through. So I took them to court lots of times and nearly always lost in magistrates' court, or stipendiary magistrates' court, because they couldn't see that there was any value in the things that I thought were fine for adults to read.
Well, hold on a minute, right? First of all, so you decided to take them to court, which most people didn't. They couldn't be bothered, right? So why? I mean,
the Customs Consolidation Act of 1888, you forfeit the goods. It was to do with a contamination law. To start off with food, but then it had, if you had a Bible in a case of books and other ones were pornography, then everything was the Bible didn't save it. But since it was a forfeiture thing, you had to then stand up against them, and I was not happy that they were seizing the things, so I would go and contest.
So there's a point of principle here,
yes,
right, for you?
So.
Not just a financial one, but more of a sort of idealism of this shouldn't be right, this isn't right.
Yeah.
And so you made the quite strange and unprecedented step of befriending the customs officers.
Yeah, I thought that's the way to do it, is not to, because you get... They're very strange, not like the police. They don't obey laws in the same way a policeman has to obey Act such and such. Any customs officer can seize something that comes through customs, and if he doesn't like it, it gets seized and you have to go to court. So
it's purely subjective on the
subjective
point of the customs officer, and it's potluck of what you get
on
what day.
Yes, a lot of customs officers at point of entry are on the conservative end of the spectrum. Including the Seventh-day Adventist who seized Robert Crumb's My Troubles with Women at Heathrow Airport, who refused to work Sundays. So yes, I befriended customs and got in touch with people at the head office of Customs House, and would then import one copy of something by mail, give it to them, and go, "What do you think about this? Do you think this is okay? Can we get it through?
Is this a goer?
Is this a goer?" And they go, "No, yes," and then we could import 500 copies or 1,000 copies or whatever, right, so instead of losing them all.
Right, that sounds very pragmatic.
It was pragmatic.
Yeah, but at the same time, there's something kind of annoying about it, isn't there? I mean, it's like, what sort of setup is it where somebody, Seventh-day Adventist or not, can just make a completely random decision about whether they think something's objectionable, and then it destroy all your stuff?
Absolutely ridiculous, because it's not a law as such. It's as I say, subjective. The people at head office were not like, they were much more sophisticated and more worldly wise and present. And I think doing this, giving them the single copies of things, gradually chipped away at the attitude that filtered down.
At least there may have been some leniency there. And at least they know who they were dealing with.
Yeah.
They weren't dealing with a pornographer.
Yeah.
They were dealing with a publisher who actually had the best interests of his publications at heart.
We used to import 2 magazines from Spain, one called El Vibra, the Viper, and the other one called Kiss Comics. And Kiss Comics was just pornography. Completely, it was just a sex comic. El Vibra had some sex in it. So I'd send both to Helps and Says Obviously, and we go through them together, and they didn't notice the sex in El Vibra because there was only a few pages of it, because the other one was all sex, so they passed all those with no problem at all.
You didn't ever grease any palms, like send a
Didn't
few,
have to, no.
bottles of wine or anything
No,
like that?
they were in a state of shock a lot of the time. They're very nice. I'm not knocking. They were very pleasant, but they didn't know what to do with me.
Well, of course, a lot of what you were importing was quite radical for the time.
Yeah.
Even today, certain bits are shocking still. And most people wouldn't ever dream of seeing that in the form of a comic. Yeah. So I imagine for them back in then, the 60s and 70s, they didn't have a clue. And you said certain people would read them, and even when they were prosecuting them, they stated they didn't understand them.
Yes.
They couldn't.
Yes, there was one case I think I mentioned. Was it with a comic called Omaha the Cat Dancer, which is basically human bodies with cats' heads having sex in various ways. And it was defending that in court, and the prosecuting barrister hadn't read it. The customs officer who got it didn't just like the cover. The magistrate refused to read it all the way through, and they were making a decision about destroying them.
And you actually that's in Knockabout issue 4, isn't it?
This is, I think, is this first.
The comic
the first story. ABC's it. Yes.
And you actually depict that scene at one point with possibly you in the dock.
Yes, I think we do. Yeah.
Or is it you and Carol?
It was Carol, my
right.
ex-wife.
So you went. So Knockabout went self-conscious then. Actually, at this point, then you started to make work about your own lives.
Yeah.
So we're getting a little ahead, but Knockabout 3 got prosecuted, didn't it? Got seized, and then on Knockabout 4, the obscene issue.
Yeah.
You started to sort of talk about it within the comics. You know, what was going on outside the comics became inside the comics.
Yes. So just a better description here. Customs Officer A seizes copies of a comic, Bizarre Sex Number 9, Omaha the Cat Dancer, which the title didn't it? Customs Officer B prosecutes the comic, which he cannot understand. Magistrate C condemns the comic, which she refuses to read all the way through. She is confused by the mixture of feline and human attributes. And it's when we had a conversation about, is Mickey Mouse a real mouse or not? Yes.
And you ended it by saying, well, I've never seen a mouse that looks like that.
Yeah, and then my solicitor said, stop talking now.
Very sensible.
And did you win that case?
No.
You didn't, no.
You also brought up the subject of Wind in the Willows, which may not have, even though it's a completely rational thing to do, may not have been the best thing at the moment, that particular moment. It's interesting what you say about that sneaky way of getting things through. That's obviously been a tried and tested method. I did an interview a few years ago with Mikhail Karlik, who was a Soviet film director in the 60s. He defected in the end. A lot of his work got censored. But actually that was his technique, because obviously every kind of film, script or had to be submitted to the censor before they'd agree to make it and stuff. So he'd put some very obvious stuff in that he knew they were going to seize upon and get the red pen out and say you can't do that. But the more subtle stuff,
they did
which is what they sneak it through,
I mean, this is the problem with censors. The world is very black and white to them. They don't see any grey, so they don't notice the subtlety.
Winding back slightly, because we're into the 80s, aren't we, with what we're talking about now?
Well, that was 70s and early 80s.
Okay.
Then the 80s becomes the... Go on.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, you started off with Hassle-Free Press before Knockabout, didn't you? That was what you set up to distribute the Fabulous Furry
Freak Brothers
Freak
and various other things.
And did you... So you didn't then import those over to here? You printed them in the UK. Here, You got the rights and you printed... Because I've got versions from... The San Francisco publisher and Knockabout over here. And another thing that happened was you must have somewhere along the way met Hunt Emerson, who was working at the Birmingham Arts Lab.
Yeah.
And who you've pretty much, I think, published most of his work
from
the 70s through.
Probably done about 30 of his books.
Yeah.
So who's Hunt Emerson?
Hunt Emerson, to me, is basically the nearest thing we have to Robert Crumb in terms of a UK underground alternative cartoonist who is maybe not as self-referential as Crumb is and as self-biographical, but he has a body of work, very distinctive style, and a breadth of material which is definitely approaching Crumb's.
Robert Crumb being the American, probably the most famous underground comic writer.
Undoubtedly, yes. Yeah. And with Gilbert Shelton probably not very far behind as well.
But people know Crumb's name more.
They do.
Hunt Emerson should be incredibly famous.
Yes.
But isn't.
But sadly isn't.
No.
And also, incidentally, he designed the Beat Girl for the Beat Band from the late 70s. You know, the scar, the little logo, the
dancing girl.
Right.
The dancing girl for the Beat, because he's a Birmingham lad.
Right.
But tell me about, did you ever go to the Birmingham Arts Lab?
Yes, lots of times, because Hunt was at the Birmingham Arts in 76, something like that, in the mid-70s. And they were printing comic books there.
Yeah.
With his chum Dave Hatton, who had a printing press.
Yeah.
So we were printing Arzac comics, which had some Hunt stuff in and various other things.
Poetry books as well.
Yeah, and I was distributing them around the country because of the distribution thing I had going.
Right.
And so that's when I got to meet Hunt, and then gradually collected various collections of Hunts.
Yeah, because my first...
That's an early one.
My first intro to British underground comics and Knockabout was this book, The Big Book of Everything by Hunt Emerson, which is a collection of various underground things he'd already done, some new bits and pieces, put out by Tony. And inside it says, copyright by Knockabout. And then at the bottom it says, still available, Thunderdogs and many more, right for catalogue. So I didn't know what this was. I was living down in Surrey. I found this in a bookshop in Crawley and thought, this looks amazing. Yeah. What is all this stuff? I was reading 2000 AD and, I'd read Star Wars and all that sort of stuff. This looks amazing. And it opened up a whole new world for me. I thought I must find this Thunderdogs. The first time I went to London, I went to Forbidden Planet when it was in Denmark Street. Have you got Thunderdogs? Yes, over there on a spinner rack.
Right.
Thunderdogs is in there. Knockabout, every issue that you've done up until I was like, what's all this? Zap Comics, all of that stuff was on the spinner rack. There's the Undergrounds over there. It
gave us a high profile having those spinners. I think it really helped.
It set you apart because you weren't hidden in comic boxes. You were out on the floor, completely visible, and that set me down a path.
That's interesting. So actually the underground comic in some ways has got more to do with like the free press stuff that had been in the late 60s and 70s.
Oh, very
IT,
much.
Very
Friends
much so.
and stuff.
Well,
more than actually the kind of Marvel.
Oh, much, yeah.
IT, Oz, Friends all ran Freak Brothers comics and other comics because that was part of that same free press thing. And there was the thing called the Underground Free Press Syndicate. Is that what it was? UFP? Anyhow, some letters like that, which meant that if the people in San Francisco at the rip-off press making Freak Brothers comics let them out to go be published, people in Chicago doing their comics, they could all swap them around with no charge. So the East Village Other could publish something, Yarrow Stalks could publish something. So it was all free.
See, Miles told me about that actually, Barry Miles, because when he was at IT, he talked about that. So stuff, and that's of course lots of the Beat stuff was coming through the same sort of thing. It got published in San Francisco and then get published here, and that's an amazing thing in itself, isn't it? That people would work like that internationally. Can't imagine.
Oh, definitely. And also, the Robert Crumb stuff in Oz was what took them to court, wasn't it? The obscenity case from Oz was the Robert Crumb cartoon of it was actually a collage, wasn't it, of Rupert Bear doing something quite rude to.
I think you can mention it on air. I think Kev, go on.
I can't even remember the full thing, but it was Rupert Bear with a fairly large penis. Yeah. Shagging somebody.
Well, I mean, the most exaggerated thing about the character was he had a bear's head, but he did have the penis as well.
And then there was who was the girl, the picture of the girl that he had.
Honey Bunch Kaminsky, a little yummy, who he married.
Yes.
She was quite young,
Crumb,
Aileen.
Yes. And that was a sort of mascot, wasn't it, for the trial? Yes. But it was very obviously a sort of prepubescent schoolgirl type thing. And that was it was one of the main things that came up in the Oz trial was the Robert Crumb. And obviously that would have been published because of this free association of reprinting and there were several things like Nasty Comics, Nasty Tales in the late 60s, which just freely reprinted all this stuff, not in very good quality, unfortunately. And so I suppose you would have seen Hunt stuff at the the Birmingham Arts
Yeah,
Lab.
at the Arts
And
Lab,
then-
yeah.
And
then-
you went on to do many things with him, like some of the classics, like Lady Chatterley's Love.
Yeah, which I'll come on to in a minute if we've got time.
Yeah.
We've got
Rhyme of the
time.
Ancient Mariner, I think, is one of his best books, which is the Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner poem, but with Hunt's added humour to it.
Yeah.
It is absolutely stunning.
Yeah.
Tell us why you love it, because you've got it here. I mean, obviously we're on radio, so nobody can see it, but it's a rather
glorious. It's
a beautiful
extremely
looking thing.
funny. It's full of puns. The albatross takes pages and pages to die after it's been shot.
Yeah, because I don't remember the Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner being that funny.
It's not funny at all, and it's really doggerel kind of poetry. Coleridge made up this sort of cod, old-fashioned language which he wrote in, but it is absolutely glorious. So trying to get rid of the albatross, which after he's got falling off his neck, takes pages.
Oh, he's got a superb storytelling style, Hunt Emerson.
Yeah.
Incredibly funny. Lots of completely wordless panels and things, which just do. And he worked for everybody, didn't he? He worked for Penthouse. He did comics for Penthouse.
No, Fiesta.
Fiesta, sorry, Fergie and the Cat.
Yeah,
things like that. He was, and he's,
and the Beano.
Quite highly sexual in places as well.
And the Beano as well.
Yeah.
Who did you do in the Beano?
He started off doing Little Plum, which it used to be Little Plum, your red-skinned chum, but they changed the second bit of the name. And then he did various other things in Beano.
I like the way that your book there is attributed to Coleridge and Emerson on the side.
Well, in fact, when Hunt would sign, I don't think this one's signed, sadly, we had a rubber stamp of Coleridge's signature as well, so you could have that.
So that was all in public domain by that point?
Oh, yes. He
do
wrote
that
it 200
freely?
years ago, yeah.
Okay.
Which I'll explain about that in a minute.
Yeah.
So, we had lots of court cases about sex then. And in the mid-'80s, if we can stay on censorship for a bit, the Obscene Publications branch came round and raided the warehouse and took away everything they could find with drug references in. Some Freak Brothers comics, other comics, dope comics, cocaine comics, they're kind of obvious. Lots of marijuana growing books about coca growing in Colombia.
Hold on a minute. I mean, under
anthropological book.
Under what law?
A test case under the Misuse of Drugs Act and the Obscene Publications Act to see if books about drugs could be seen to deprave and corrupt. Turned out they couldn't after we'd been in. So we had so they kept the books for nearly 3 years. Which is a part of the punishment is to try and put you out of business by doing that. Right. So then we were on trial at the Old Bailey for about a month, and we had expert witnesses. So most of the trial was about the effects of cannabis. So you'd have an expert witness for the prosecution from the Maudsley Hospital in South London saying about what damage it caused to people. Then we'd have a professor of psychopharmacology from Oxford University on our side arguing about other things about cannabis. I sat there in my suit with little hot rock dope burns down the front of it. I hadn't noticed till later. Not saying a word the whole time. At one point,
because you've been advised by your counsel not to.
Yeah, because I had fabulous. I have a brilliant solicitor who's a friend of mine, and very good barristers. So Brian Capstick was the lead QC, and then a young Geoffrey Robertson was his junior at the time.
He became very famous later, didn't he?
Yeah, he did other things for us later.
So was your brief's advice to let them dig their own hole? Or?
Yes, and they did. And the jury, who I think were probably some of them baffled by some of the detail that was gone into, but the jury were obviously enjoying it and wondering why it was happening at all.
Kind of a break from murders and all the rest of it, right?
Yeah. And so at one time, the foreman of the jury came into court, and they don't normally come to make jokes, and he said to the presiding judge, we've just noticed that today there's a horse called Magic Mushroom running in the 3:30 at Lingfield. Should we put any money on it?
Or should we bring the horse in?
Yeah, which is probably about the only joke told by a jury at the Old Bailey ever. So that was, anyhow, we got... so just to make the story a little bit wider, when they seized all copies of 72 different titles... but they said that's going to take 6 months to go through at the Old Bailey. So we'll select 15, which we agreed with, to go forward to the Old Bailey. We then got acquitted completely, having raised money with things like this and that other
the trial
special there.
Yeah, which is a hard book.
Because it was and do benefits with Victoria Wood and Billy Bragg and Benjamin Zephaniah and Tony Allen and John Dowie and other people to raise money for the cost.
This classic 80s, isn't it?
And we had the Right to Read campaign, and Right to Read button badges and so on. Anyhow, so we won. There was also some other people who'd been importing drug books as well, who got seized by the police, and they were going to have a copycat case just after ours. Their legal team argued that we shouldn't be allowed to publicise the result of our trial, where we got acquitted on every title, because it would prejudice their trial. I haven't spoken to these people since. I argued about this furiously, saying it's a trial about censorship. We've just won. They probably won't go ahead with the other trial if we publicise. So we put all this effort into it, and people had raised money for us, and so it never got any publicity.
Oh,
and the other people, when they got done, they got off on every title except one. So it's
so actually,
and sorry, it's a terribly long story. And then
worth telling.
The books that were left over, about 3 months later, they gave us back the ones that had been at the Old Bailey. They said, "Oh well, we're going to take these to a magistrate's court." The ones that were left over from the 72 that they selected the 15 from. So they took all the other titles to a magistrate's court, where we had various creators and artists standing up and saying, "Then we lost there." So that was a bit.
Damn.
That was them. They didn't like losing.
Yes.
But I mean, you had some supporters then. So I mean, because it is a sort of fairly fundamental rights issue, isn't it? Freedom of speech. Yeah. So you had backing, because I imagine it's not cheap to fight these cases.
No, it isn't. And it
takes
your
time
as well.
Eats your time, right?
I reckon I was spending a day and a half a week doing legal stuff for about 2.5 years.
But people rallied round. I mean, you mentioned a whole cast of characters there.
Yeah, and had been able to have the publicity after the acquittal, it would have been quite a famous case.
Right, like the Oz trial was.
Exact.
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
And how did you meet Alan Moore? I'm interested in. Obviously he was writing for 2000 AD in the 80s.
Probably met him at comic conventions then.
Right. Okay.
And
he was sympathetic to the counterculture, presumably.
Yeah, and he wrote something for a couple of the Knockabout anthologies at times.
He's in here,
Bits.
isn't
He might be in there.
Yeah, it's on the front cover. I think he writes a forward. And you've got David Gibbons in here as well.
Yeah,
Obviously they went
various
on to
people.
do Watchmen and various things. And you've published various things from him over the years, haven't you? Including right up until the present day, Jerusalem, and the end of the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen.
Yes,
which From Hell.
From Hell
was much earlier. Yeah, but I mean, Alan famously bowed out of comics a couple of years ago with the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, which Tony published the final sort of 6 issues. Was it? I think. Was the last one?
Yeah, we did. Well, we did volume 3 and volume 4. So the Century volume, which was was volume 3, right, and then Tempest volume 4.
The Tempest.
Yeah, because he fell out with DC and whatever. That was
I'm going to read that out. This is the trouble with censorship is that some people wouldn't read a comic even if it was banned.
Yeah.
Very good. But on the subject of censorship, because you mentioned Lily Chatterley's Lover over there. Right, now, of course, that had been itself the subject of a obscene publication.
Which is why we did it. Right. So after this trial, we thought, what's the next book we're going to publish? And we went, it's got to be that, because this was the first book published under the Modern Obscene Publications Act, which came out in 1959. And so we thought we'd do that. So we took out all the social commentary, all the political comment, and just kept the sex, really, pretty much, and the plot. Kept all the plot and the sex in it.
I remember that getting a fair bit of press at the time.
Yeah, it did.
Definitely.
Yeah.
You know.
And for some reason, this second edition or third edition, well, we had a strapline across the top which said "Not for sale to wives or servants," which is one of the quotes from the original trial. Why would not left it off?
So we're going to kind of keep circling back. So have they left you alone now, Tony? Do they still keep knocking on the door?
No, not from the mid-80s until the mid-90s, when this book, My Troubles with Women by Robert Crumb, which we published. We published it in 1990. And put it together. It's various stories about him and women.
All of them true, presumably, as well, or in some way biographical, autobiographical.
So autobiographical. And we'd run out of copies, and we'd sold some to our colleagues in San Francisco, Last Gasp Comics. And so 5 years later, we imported 500 copies from them, and they got seized at Heathrow Airport. And so I said, but
for their pornographic content.
So I said, yeah, there's 2 panels showing sex in out of about 600 panels, which is what they didn't like.
Is the penis touching the lips?
Yeah, it is in here, but it wasn't in the rest of it.
If it isn't, it's all right.
I wrote to Customs and said, look, this book's already been on sale in England. It's on sale in Waterstones. It's on sale in W.H. Smith's. I think it was. It's all various places. And it's been reviewed in The Guardian and The Times and wherever else. And they went, never mind. And that was the Seventh-day Adventist was the person who seized it. So they still had to follow him. Right. So we went to court just for a day with Geoffrey Robertson as a QC and various experts on our side, including Paul Gravett, the comics expert, and a couple of other people. And we went out and bought some top-shelf magazines from the local W.H. Smith's showing nearly oral sex. And the prosecution barrister kept going, is the penis touching the lips? And it didn't go well for them. The magistrates went out for about 10 minutes and came back and said,
get out of here.
We acquitted. And we asked for costs.
Right.
And Customs don't pay costs. They don't like that.
Right.
So we got all, by that time, Geoffrey Robertson was earning $3,500 a day or whatever, you know. So we got all our costs, which Customs were furious about.
Did you get the books back?
Oh, yeah.
You did. Oh, that's good.
But then Customs wrote us, which I don't have a copy of, unfortunately, here, a letter saying what sex acts could be shown in comics from then on.
Oh,
so basically a version of the comics code for the UK, maybe.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Yes, you could have light bondage, but not heavy bondage. You could have pretty much everything except bestiality and paedophilia.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, I think that's fair enough, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's very second. But the interesting thing is actually, of course, is that you know, because you're doing it independently, you are, and you've got all these resources, as in people who support you. You're resilient enough to survive it. But of course, for other people, it knocked them out. I don't know if Kev remembers this, but we had Barry Kane.
Yes.
This is a couple of years back when we were talking about flexi discs, and
Yeah.
Barry published Flexi Pop magazine, which became very, very successful. He went away one weekend and left it in the hands of, I can't remember his full name, but actually Mark Manning, also known as Zodiac Mind Warp, and who did a shoot up in King's Cross with a gothy band, and there was sort of.
Now, wasn't it Depeche Mode?
It was somebody like
Someone
that, but
like
they were
that.
covered in sort of butcher's meat, and there was all it was a bit S&M anyway. But it went, and of course it was sold in W.H. Smith's. And what happened is that a granny in Blackpool, I think Barry said,
bought it for
bought it for her granddaughter, got it home, and of course Granny opened it, and then there's this sort of centre spread of these kind of.
It was a photo story, wasn't it?
Photo story, kind of covered in red meat and all this sort of stuff, and complained to W.H. Smith's. They pulled the magazine, and that was it. It was done.
Yeah.
That was the end of Flexi Pop, a very successful magazine. Bang, out of action straight away. So your actual independence, the fact that you carry on being underground, actually gave you the resilience, right? It could kill you.
Viz magazine did a good thing with W.H. Smith's. They got pulled from where they were with other things and suddenly put on the top shelf because they suddenly thought it had adult. They didn't like Johnny Fartpants or whatever it might be. I don't know. They suddenly didn't like it.
Yeah.
So they put it up on the top shelf. So the next issue of Viz, on the back, there's people doing semaphore, and it says, "Fuck off, W.H. Smith, you bunch of cunts." That got through fine.
Tony, was there anything that you decided not to publish? I mean, not because it wasn't any good.
No, I don't think so.
It was too risque.
No, I don't think
or
so.
would have got you in trouble.
No. I mean, there's a limit to how much you could publish. We're a very small organisation, you know. So
but you didn't decline anything on its because you're worried about the content.
Was it with dealing with Crumb? Did you deal with him personally, or his publishers? And because you've only done a couple of books, you've done the Blues book as well, haven't you?
Yeah, we did a sort of series of 3. There's My Troubles with Women, then Our Crumb Draws the Blues, and Our Crumb's America, which is a political one.
Yes.
So the Blues one, all music stuff, and then America, political. Yeah. And then a couple of other things after. We did the one of him and his wife called Drawn Together, where they each draw themselves about their life, which is incredibly explicit in both sexual and putting yourself out to the world terms. There's unbelievably honest.
Yeah, unbelievable sort of sex scenes between the two of them that they've both drawn, and
the rest of their life and their arguments and things, which most people don't do.
Yeah, they're quite upfront, aren't they? They're very promiscuous, but it's all within the confines of the marriage.
Yeah,
but one each knows, and also gets jealous of the other. But that is quite eye opener.
And also, what's quite interesting about that is it's not something that you could portray really in any other format, is it? That combination of the sort of the image and the
you wouldn't
brutal autobiography like that, right?
Yes, and what they do as well by drawing each other in the comic, and they've got very different styles. Obviously, I mean, Aileen is very simplified, isn't it? And almost like she changes from picture to picture. Whereas Robert is Robert and does what he does, you know. But Robert Crumb's career is about himself, by and large, you know, and I don't think that any cartoonist or comic artist has done what he's done.
I think most novelists don't put so much of themselves on. Philip Roth a bit, perhaps, but you know, lots of people don't put so much of themselves on the page.
Yeah. Another one I wanted to ask you about, which was, I don't know if it was exactly a bestseller, but which you did a book with Leo Baxendale called Thurp, which I think is pronounced.
Yes, because actually the name of the village he was living in Gloucestershire as well, which is spelled THRRP or something ridiculous.
It's one of the most bizarre comics I've ever read. Leo
Baxendale, Bash Street Kids, Minnie the Minx, various things that became famous.
Yeah, a legend of British kids comedy, humour comics.
So when Leo came along and said, I'd like Knockabout to do a book, I went, yes, that'd be nice. Yeah. And then he said, I showed one page or something. He said, I won't show it till it's finished. I went, all right. And when it came along, he went, oh, this isn't quite what we were expecting. Because it was very strange.
It's very strange. As I've got a copy at home, but I don't think I've read it more than once. It's just a collection of characters just sort of basically blowing raspberries for the whole book, isn't
Pretty
it?
much.
There's not really a story there, but it's Leo Baxendale.
Yeah, he had been, it had not been working much for 7 years. I've been fighting DC Thompson over rights to his characters and work, and so he was in a bit of a
pickle.
Yeah, unusual state. He's in a pickle.
But you published nevertheless.
Well, we printed 15,000 copies because we'd already decided to do that, and because we sold about 1,000.
So. I bought one.
Good. Well done.
Well, you know, we're actually running out of time here, guys. So Kev, you've got a couple of things with you. Anything that you want to sort of highlight to Tony whilst you're here?
I think we've covered quite a lot. I wanted to go into the sort of comics boom of the 80s because obviously you switched mid-80s from, and after the trial thing, from the sort of not regular small floppy sized comics into the larger A4 sized graphic novels, shall we say, anthologies for Knockabout and subsequent publications, and very much I think anticipated the graphic novel boom of the end of the 80s. How did you fare? Because I know Knockabout didn't exactly fare well off of the comics boom ultimately, and did you go bankrupt at a point in the early 90s, really? Or you wound things down?
Well, we were still recovering from the court case in the mid 80s.
Right, okay.
And then us and Titan Books were sharing distributors that was getting graphic novels into bookstores.
Right, because at the end of the 80s, with things like Watchmen and Dark Knight Returns and V for Vendetta, you know, Mouse certainly was. There was suddenly comics that aren't for kids, shock horror, you know. Articles everywhere in the press, and you know, things started to change and get taken more seriously, and as a result you start getting comics stocked in graphic novel form in bookshops, which is now part of the course. And I think Knockabout definitely probably benefited from some of that because you started getting your stuff into bookshops.
Because the other outlets for the floppy comics didn't exist so much anymore, so we were doing everything as books.
Well, you probably not only benefited, but you probably contributed to it as well, right?
I was going to say, I think you probably, you know, one of the instigators of getting things into bookshops anyway. But, you know, I wondered how you fared. Did you see a resurgence towards the end of the 80s?
Yes, around about 1990 there was, Right. And then it faded away again a bit until the early 2000s.
Yeah, there was a bust about 93, 92, wasn't there? Whereas it was, the whole medium was so overloaded because everyone had jumped on the bandwagon.
This was a problem. This was just a technical problem with one of the distributors who was giving bookshops 30 or 50 copies of individual titles when they were probably going to sell 5. And they went, we can't sell these, and so it all sort of just collapsed on itself.
Yeah.
But I mean, now comics have become, particularly some editions, they're super collectible, right?
Some definitely,
Superhero comics are. Our comics are not collectible. I just want people to read them.
Yeah. Well, you've remained. A lot of stuff has remained in print. I wouldn't say there's necessarily a collectible edition of any Knockabout stuff, is there? Because you've remained in print.
No.
You know.
Yeah. I don't think so.
What's your warehouse like?
Our warehouse is now out in the Fens in Cambridgeshire. It's not my warehouse anymore. It's somebody else's, my mate Steve Robson's warehouse, who's also a small publisher. He publishes Fanfare. And so it's all out there.
But you said to me earlier, you're never happy then when you're rooting through a cardboard
I know, well,
box.
I was. You see, that's why I kind of miss the warehouse now that I work from home. Yeah.
So how do you get your Knockabout books today? If someone wants to find Knockabout, where do they go?
They either go online to Amazon or Book Depository or other places like that.
Okay.
We have a distributor called Turnaround, who are a sort of alternative distributor who do a lot of gay and lesbian culture, black culture, various modern fiction, successful stuff, and quite a lot of graphic novels.
Okay.
And so they have a sales team that go around the country, and they provide all the so we don't do that direct anymore.
But you can find it. You can go on. You've got a Facebook page, haven't you, for Knockabout?
Yes.
You've got mail order.
Yeah.
And
I'll put links to those in the show notes. But I mean, Tony, what's next, or what's going on at the moment?
What's going on at the moment? These are the last two books I think we did, were they? Scotland Yardie, which is about a Jamaican copper who comes to Brixton to help out with policing there. He has
spliff.
Jamaican rules too.
No subtlety with that.
No subtlety. No.
In a giant joint.
And it also features Boris Johnson and lots of other satirical things. Bobby Josephs has put lots of other things in it. In fact, before Johnson became Prime Minister, and this is a much more serious book, Mongrel. This woman's first graphic novel about growing up in mixed culture, Bangladeshi English culture, getting disowned by her family and struggling with being between two cultures.
Wow.
So I think between those two, it sort of still covers the sort of same sort of range. You're still pushing the countercultural spirit, Tony. What is the sense of it?
Yeah. Tony goes, yeah. It's a terrific ending, I thought.
Yeah, well, I'm not quite sure what to say now. But there we go. I think that's it. I think we did it. So, the countercultural comic life of Tony Bennett. Thanks for coming to the Bureau of Lost Culture, Tony.
Thanks for inviting me, Stephen. I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Great. And Kev?
Yeah.
Nice to see you again. Thanks for coming to... Well, thanks for the intro to Tony, but also to come and sharing your wisdom about the strange life of
and for
comics.
reading the right comics.
It's been definitely illuminating, hasn't it?
Totally, yeah. So there we have it. I should also say that Tony brought with him a wonderful treasure trove of Knockabout comics and graphic novels, which Kev and I sort of squabbled over before distributing and rushing off with. What a lovely man, and what a great story that was. Thanks to Kev and to Tony. I'll put links to both of them in the show notes, and thanks to you for listening. Another wonderful romp, I thought, through some aspect of counterculture and a little bit of a hidden story, not forgotten, of course, yet, because Tony is still at it. I hope you enjoyed that, and all episodes of Bureau of Lost Culture, which of course are now on all major podcast providers. If you enjoy it, do leave us a review. We'd appreciate that, particularly on iTunes actually, whereas it helps other people know about it. And of course at Soho Radio and at www.bureauoflostculture.com. Thanks for listening. Next time, I am Stephen Coates.